Perry Bellegarde is a member of the Little Black Bear First Nation in Saskatchewan. He has served as a band councillor in Little Black Bear, as chief of the Federation of Saskatchewan Indian Nations, and Saskatchewan regional chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He now holds the title of AFN National Chief, and National Chief Bellegarde joins Hazel Marshall and myself this afternoon. Perry, as you're aware, Prime Minister Stephen Harper declined the invitation to speak to a summer gathering of the Assembly of First Nations as National Chief of the Assembly. What are your thoughts in regards to his decline?
Well, first off, I would say it's a missed opportunity to build a relationship and to get direction and listen directly from the people that they're setting policy and legislation over. Both him and the Minister of Indian Affairs didn't show up. So, again, it's a missed opportunity. We had lots on the agenda to talk about with him, from the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls inquiry to the importance of revitalizing First Nations languages, to as well as implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations. So, again, a missed opportunity.
In your opinion, which direction would be the best option for the Aboriginal population? A new relationship or a renewed relationship?
It's got to be. We're always going to have a relationship, and we've had one past, present, and future. So it's going to have to be a renewed relationship. You know, it's a new relationship or a renewed one. Well, it's 6 one, half a dozen of the other. No matter what we're going to have a relationship with the federal crown. We're going to have a relationship with provincial crown. We're going to have a relationship with industry. It's important to develop a partnership and a cooperative effort going forward, because there's something in Canada that people need to get their head around. And what I keep referring to is the gap, closing the gap that exists in Canada. And the gap I refer to is the United Nations Human Development Index has rated Canada 6th in terms of quality of life. But when you apply the same indices to Indigenous peoples, First Nations people, we're 63rd. That's the gap that needs to be closed, because that gap represents the overcrowded housing. That gap represents the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That gap represents the cap on education on reserve and the high number of students on the post-secondary student wait list. It represents the high youth suicides. And that's not good for our people. That's not good for the provinces. That's not good for this country. And so we need to have a relationship where governments will focus on closing the gap.
National Chief, one of your main priorities has been to establish a judicial inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women. Are you close to having that accomplished?
Well, again, we've had one round table with the provinces, in terms of an action plan. We're meeting with the premiers again in the next few days to push them on their commitment to host another round table. We have to continue to put pressure on the federal government, because they have a big role to play as well. And Mr. Mulcair coming to the Chiefs Assembly and Mr. Trudeau coming to the Chiefs Assembly both said if they're elected, they will immediately call and convene a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So that's positive. It's not here now, but the election's coming on October 19th. We'll see what happens.
How does the Assembly of First Nations intend on boosting Indigenous votership at a grassroots level?
It's an education and awareness campaign. That's what we're doing at the grassroots level. We brought this up to our Chiefs Assembly that we need, and the message was simple, that we need to mobilize the First Nations vote. And people don't get it or realize that we didn't get the right to vote in federal or provincial elections until 1961. And now that we have this right, this individual right to vote, we have to harness that political power, because if we get out to vote, we can influence 51 ridings. And that, like I say, could be the difference between a majority and our minority government. And so to get the education and awareness out to our community members about where to vote, when to vote, and what you need in order to be eligible to vote, 2 pieces of ID. And that's the whole purpose about doing an education awareness campaign at the grassroots community level, and utilizing our chiefs and leadership to be part of that strategy.
AFN National Chief Perry Bellegarde on the show this afternoon. Mr. National Chief, as you may or not know, CFWE broadcasts northern and central Alberta, including reserves and communities. The First Nations people are listening right now, Mr. Bellegarde. What is one thing you would like to say to your people?
First, because I know a lot of people are affected by the fires, so our hearts and minds go to the people that have been taken out of the communities, and we want to make sure they have food and clothing and shelter. The other thing is to provide hope to them all that change is coming, and the change in a good way, that we all have to collectively work together to bring about that change across Canada, so that there is respect for Aboriginal rights and title, that there's respect for treaty implementation, and so that we have a government that will listen and move ahead on dealing with the high numbers of First Nations children in care, provincial care, dealing with the whole land and resource question. And again, it's all about finding that common ground about peaceful coexistence and mutual respect between our relatives right across Canada.
All right, National Chief Perry Bellegarde, appreciate you taking time out this afternoon.
Thanks for the opportunity.